In this video, I will talk about religious prejudice and discrimination based off of symbolic interactionism and conflict theory as it relates to sociological behaviors in acts of discrimination from one or more individuals to another. There is a difference between prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice is more of an attitude toward an individual or group that does not necessarily have to be associated with negative experiences, whereas discrimination is an action based on those prejudices, any unfair treatment towards a group or individual.
So I lived in England for 5 years, and the bulk of those 5 years was like my junior high growing up phase, where it's like the most important um, growing up teenage years. And I lived in England, and being a teenager and being the only LDS um, girl in my entire school was really hard. I felt a lot of times that I was um, almost bullied in a way, but more so just discriminated because I was different, and these kids being teenagers were just not educated as far as anything to do with my religion, and I was something that was different, and so all the other kids kind of um, were um, bouncing off each other and didn't were kind of afraid to get to know me or anything about my religion. Um, and so I felt that it was hard to really get to know anybody else. And I think a lot of what to do with me feeling like I was being discriminated is because they were brought up that way. They were taught to be diehard, like Church of England religion, or that's just how they were brought up. Their upbringing was you were either Catholic or you attended this church or this church, and you knew nothing about any other churches. So I think a large part of religious discrimination has to do with educating children. Um, and I found that they were very prideful in their history of their country. However, because they have so many different ethnicities within England, um, I felt that their downfall was getting to know other people's religions, because we had Hindus, we had, obviously I was the only LDS, there were um, Baptists, Catholics, Church of England, all these religions, and yet nobody knew anything about any of them. And so I'm sure I wasn't the only one, but um, I felt very alone and very distant from anybody else.
Conflict theory states that power is distributed unequally in society, where a ruling class hold the majority of the power. This was influenced by Karl Marx. We will hear examples of this in Jessica's and Dave's stories as they talk about being the minority in their religions, both moving to England and coming from England.
When I was 17, I was living in England, been born and raised there, and my mother died. And my father felt like prospects were better in the United States. His brother had preceded him by about 7 years. And the brother said, come to America, that's where the future is. So the family was uprooted, and I was uprooted from all the social and academic and total cultural experience of being a British guy and coming to America. And I kind of resented America when I landed, really, because everything was so much bigger and better and more um, modern than England was. But everybody would kind of tell me, yeah, everything in America is great. You know, you don't have this in England, you don't have that in England. And that kind of rubbed me raw. But when they started saying, you know, hey, and we've got the only true and living church, I thought they'd gone a little too far on that. And that kind of repelled me more than it attracted me. And
George Herbert Mead was one of the individuals who developed symbolic interactionism. It is believed that people's behavior in interaction with others in social settings are governed by their conception of themselves. We see an example of this as Dave's wife Linda shared her experience growing up as a Protestant in Texas, sharing both a religious and racial experience, and how there were prejudices that she felt in both of these circumstances and how they relate to one another.
I was raised in the South, and I was a Protestant, which was the predominant religion in that area. And when I was in college, my senior year in college, culture in the South is everyone goes to church and everyone goes out to eat afterwards. Great people, tremendously devoted to um, their religion and service oriented, but did not understand why that would be a problem. And it wasn't until we worked it out that we were able to resolve it. I'd like to give you another example that'll maybe make this make more sense. My junior year in college in Austin, Texas, I had a black roommate. Black people were still a minority back then, maybe 5% of the population. So she would often spend her time where she was the only black person in our group. And although she was widely admired and accepted, there were times she would feel anxious and estranged. And I'd say, "What's up with that, Patty? How come you're acting that way?" And she wasn't able to articulate to me why. One weekend, she invited me to her home in East Texas, near Houston. And I went with her and realized I was the only white person. And even though I was treated as kindly and as graciously as anyone could be treated, I started having panic attacks. My heart was racing. I was sweating. I was extremely uncomfortable, and she understood why. And we realized that the problem was that I couldn't identify or relate to what was going on around me because I didn't see anyone who looked like me or had my background. And so that became a very anxious, difficult situation. That was an eye-opener for me because then I started to understand that a lot of discrimination occurs because people can't relate to or understand what's going on with people who are different.
As we heard from Jessica, Dave, and Linda, we learn that those in power, or who are more dominant, supersede others and tend to force their opinion or beliefs unknowingly in conflict theory, and that as we interact with others, our behaviors affect who we are and what we feel with symbolic interactionism.